Okay, I think rather than waiting for everybody else to join, we should probably kick off the session because we've only got half an hour to go through some of the key functionality in archiving. So thank you very much for the guys that have joined us. I know we had a few acceptances from over in Asia, so thank you very much for the guys that have joined us over in Asia. I can appreciate that it's quite late for you guys. So to start this off, my name is Peter Hughes. I'm one of the directors of Opemari Consulting, and I'm very proud to be able to get to this position where we're actually demoing the archive functionality. The archive represents a fairly long project for us, so I'm very happy that we've managed to get it this far. We've done an extreme amount of testing internally, so I think we've been testing the archive for the last 6 months internally. And we're just about to release the archiver into beta, so probably the next week or so we'll be releasing the archive functionality into beta testing. So just before I go any further, we have got a legal disclaimer. So obviously, as the archiver hasn't been released yet, and we are about to go into beta testing with a number of clients or potential clients, the functionality that we're going to show you in this demonstration is, as far as we're concerned, as close to the end functionality or the desired functionality as possible. Obviously, as we go through beta testing, there is a possibility that some of the functionality might change. So bear that in mind, obviously, as we take you through the demonstration of archiving. So what is archiving, or what do we mean by archiving? It's probably quite important for us to actually stress this up front, and we actually show this on every single demonstration or every single presentation that we've done on archiving, because it does vary quite differently depending on which client, which Clarity user you're actually talking to. So I'm just going to read this word for word because it is important to us that everybody understands. So data archiving is the process of moving data that is no longer actively used into a separate data storage device for long-term retention. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking information that's no longer used in Clarity, moving it out of the production database and giving you the ability to restore that information into an archive database so that you can continue to report on it and continue to have access to it up until a point where obviously you don't need it and you can delete it. So it's quite important that we stress that up front because, as I say, it does change people's opinion of what archiving is and on who you talk to. So I think that's pretty much it from me. I'm going to hand over now to Andy Litton. So Andy Litton is really the genius or the brainchild behind archiving. So he's been working over the last couple of years with our development team on developing the functionality for Clarity. So I suppose without further ado, I'll hand over to Andy because I'm guessing the majority of you guys have actually joined to see how archiving works. So over to you, Andy.
Okay, hi all. I'm just hopefully you can hear me. Hands up if you can't. Okay, so archiving, what is it? Well, to start with, it's a plugin into Clarity. So if I go to add-ins, I can see Opemari Archiver for Clarity PPM, and that's the add-in there. Now it consists of a number of views, i.e. a new menu item underneath the administration menu, primarily 4 objects under there, and also a couple of jobs that run within Clarity. In terms of using the archiving, then there's sort of 3 main steps at the moment. The first step is marking instances. So if I want to mark an instance of an object for archiving, I can go under the administration menu, marked instances, and this shows me all of the instances that I've already marked for archiving. But I can go into here, say marked instances, if I have the rights to do so, and then I'm presented with a list of objects in Clarity. Now this list of objects is predefined and also configurable, so and also dynamically updated. Sorry. So from a Pre-configured perspective, out of the box, we support all MPIOs, so projects, products, applications, assets, timesheets, so time via time periods, and resources. But in addition, it will also dynamically include any new custom objects, custom master objects that anybody may have created in Clarity. So, for example, if I look in here at the moment, I see, from a selection perspective, I just see a list of most of the standard ones plus all these dynamic ones, just to prove it to you that I can go and create an object, and as long as it's a master object, I'll call it something obvious, AAA, save and return. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'll just go and create a master object. My database. Trundling away. But once that master object is created, then it will immediately become available in my for instances of that object to be marked for archive. Okay, so now just cancel that, say marked instances. I can now see AA has automatically appeared in my list of objects to be able to mark. In this instance, I'm just going to say select projects, so I want to mark some projects for archiving. And what I'm presented with after I've selected project is the standard project list screen. So the similar is true for the custom objects, assets, applications. It presents to you the standard list screens that you have in Clarity. And in terms of functionality, this is similar to the functionality you see for resources when you're granting instance rights to a particular user or group. This is the same sort of behavior here. So in this instance, so what it provides me the ability, for example, is if I'm interested in projects, I can now build a power filter, for example, and say I'm interested in projects with a finish date, let's get finish of a finish by the end of last year, for example. Get rid of that. Have I not marked them? Filter.
Greater than.
That'll be why. Yeah. So given this, then I can actually then say select these and select more. So I can pick, say for example, all projects which are have ended in the last year, and I've now added those to my marked instances page. Now that's the first step in terms of archiving. So that actually identifies any objects that I want to either archive, i.e. read the data out, or actually delete from Clarity. Okay, this screen I have to have specific rights to get to. Once I've marked them, the next stage is actually to go into Archives itself. When I'm in Archives, what I can do is I can create a new archive. So I'll just call it, say, Archive 2013 Projects. Save that. And then under Contents, I can now add anything that I want to add, and this list now comes from the marked instances pages. So this lets me then add all of those projects into the marked instances. Now the one thing I have noticed is actually I don't want to actually do the templates. Okay, so that actually now has created me an archive set. So I have an archive set which is called Archive 2013 Projects. That archive set will consist of all of these projects. And now what I can actually do, let's just get rid of these other templates. What I can now also do is now I can specify an action to perform on that. Now there are three actions we have. The first is to archive, which means read the data out of Clarity. The second is check, which performs a validation on the data, and a check is always performed pre-delete. So, for example, if I want to delete a project, then there are certain situations when I can't delete a project. An example of that is if a project has in its hierarchy other investments which are not allocated to it either 100 or 0%, because we have no mechanism of re-leveling the allocations of the investments within its hierarchy to other investments. So in that sort of situation, we would actually, the check would say, you can't do it because of this reason. You need to correct it. Once you've corrected it, you can then actually run the check again, and it would actually validate and then allow you to delete the data from Clarity. But just as an example, I'll set up an archive. So what I want to do is archive the data out of Clarity. So I'll create an action called archive. Now that action is now scheduled to run, and it will sit scheduled to run until I run a job to run any actions. We have a screen in Clarity which is called actions, and in here I can see all scheduled actions. Okay, so I can have many actions on different archive sets to actually run or be run by the jobs. So in here I can see I have a resource delete archive, and it's got a check action to run, resource delete assigned, check action, delete a project, check action, and archive these 2013 projects. So I'm running 3 checks and one actual read of the data. So if I just quickly run that, and just explain the job. Now the job has a number of parameters. Well, first is the output directory. So when we actually do the read of data from Clarity, what we do is we write the data to the file system into a directory within the file system. That data can then be either archived off onto tape, burned onto CD, or you can use our restore facility to restore that data into an archive database somewhere else. The restore facility will prevent you from ever being able to restore the data into Clarity. That's one thing we can't do, and there are various reasons, but it's extremely complicated to do because Clarity is very configurable. So in terms of the output directory, that's where the data gets written to. The delete batch count option is a parameter that allows us to throttle the delete. So it actually stops the delete from trying to, for example, delete 1 million records from a table. It will actually break that up into 10,000 records at a go in order to actually relieve any pressures on the database, so that mostly on SQL Server, but it does affect Oracle as well, so that you're not actually running out of resources on the database server while this is running. Default resource, default investment, and default project, they're used primarily when you're actually deleting a project or a resource and that resource has been referenced somewhere else. So for example, and I'll show you an example of this, if I'm deleting a resource and that resource is the project manager on another project, rather than breaking that other project or saying you're not allowed to delete this resource, what we do is we substitute deleted resource in for that project manager, which then allows the resource to be deleted. And the similar is true for the investments. You know, if someone's got a configured attribute on a project which says refer to this other project, then there are a number of things we can do. We can either substitute the default investment, so that attribute would then appear as deleted resource, or we can blank that value out in order to leave the data integrity okay. Okay, what I'm going to do is just submit this job. I'm flying along a bit because half an hour, we've got half an hour, so it's more of a taster rather than going into too much detail. So that job is now scheduled, it's now processing. If I look at the job logs for this job, I can actually see what it's doing. So it's actually already finished the checks, and now it's actually the check actions, and now it's actually reading the data out. So if I go back to my actions, and look at running, I can see it's archiving the projects. If I look at completed, then it's already completed my check actions. So, which means if I go back to my archives, I can see, yeah, the resource delete has been checked, the delete project has been checked, and the resource delete is still scheduled, and it's now running the archive projects. Okay. So while it's doing that, what I'm going to do is flick over and just show you what it actually takes a little while to run the archive projects. It takes, for that number of projects, it takes about 60 seconds on this machine, but the thing that takes a little bit more time is actually writing all the schema data out. And that actually takes longer than writing all the data out, bizarrely. So I'll just flick into here. So when I write an archive, what I'm actually doing is I'm writing, as I said, reading the data out of Clarity onto the file system. And in this instance, I'm writing to this directory, archive set 50, which is this one here. And then it has the unique ID afterwards, which is actually the action ID. So if I have a look in this subdirectory, I have two folders in there, content and schema. Content contains a list, basically all of the data in a table by table basis for all the tables we read when we're reading these projects. And the schema directory will contain all of the schema information, i.e. the table build information for the restore facility. If I have a look in the content, if I just pick one, in projects for example, just read that in Excel, this data is written out as CSV files. Okay, so they're just separated, one record per row, and it writes all of the information into there. It even writes, for example, the binary data. So if I looked at the assignment table, I've obviously got blobs in that table, you know, PR extension. What it does is it writes that out as a hex encoded string. Okay, and the restore will decode that when it writes it back to a database into a blob column or an image column for SQL Server. Okay, what else do I get when I read the data out? In here I also get, apart from these two directories, I also get a manifest file. So this manifest file contains a list of, one, the instances I selected to be archived out, so it contains the name, the type of object, the name of the object, the code, and the internal ID of the object. And then it also contains a list of tables I touched. So I have a list of all the tables, the DDL file, i.e. the table definition, so that I can create the data, so I can create the tables on the destination archive database, and also the data file. So in some instances there will be a DDL file but no data file. So for example, SRM companies, so that wasn't being referenced by any of my projects, then I've got the DDL file because it was potentially a table I needed, but there is no data in there. So we try and get as much data out of Clarity when you archive a project in order to allow reporting on the restored data. So, for example, on a project, we'll take the matrix, we'll take the department's locations, we will take invoices if they're related to that project, you know, chargeback information, chargeback transactions, WIP transactions, etc. Okay, what we also write out is, I have a directory here called 50.37027. What we also write out when we actually run the job is we actually create an audit file. So in this archives directory, I have an audit file for every archive I've produced. And that audit file contains a list of everything we did on the database. So this is more looking, you know, if anyone says, well, what happened, what did it delete, or what did it do, it's possible to go in here and say, okay, well, this is what we were doing. We were doing a read on this archive set, and actually these were the default values I was going to use, these were the paths I was going to follow, and this is all the actual SQL I issued in order to actually extract that data. Okay, so the audit file is very handy, one for us, and yeah, if ever something doesn't look quite right, we can have a look and say, ah, that's what it is there. Okay, if I flick back to the job, now if I look at my archive sets, I had actions to perform on all of them. First off was resource delete, it's checked and it's checked OK. Delete project, check, and it's checked OK. And then I wanted a resource delete, and I was checking that, but I can see I have an error there. So if I click on this, I can see it says, well, actually, this resource is on at least one investment team, so I would not allow you to delete this resource. So you either have to archive the investment first or remove the resource from the investment team. So, for example, if I res 001, if I now went into resources, for that resource, look at res 001, happens to be on that page, look at allocations, I can see I'm on a project team there. So if I just remove myself from that project team, oh, it's locked, sorry. But I could then actually remove myself from that project team, and actually once I'd removed, I could rerun the check on that archive job. It would then pass, and I would then actually be in position of being able to delete the resource. The thing to mention is when you try and delete the resource, it says, well, you may already be a participant on the project. If you're a participant on the project, so I can see resource here is on the team, but am I also a participant? Well, I can actually have a look and say, yes, I am. Well, if I'm a participant, it will delete the participant. Okay, so there are some things we can delete and other things we can't delete. The reason we don't delete from the team is because then if you've got actuals, the whole thing gets screwed up. Whereas a participant, you're just a participant on the team. Okay. Right, so now that's reading and running checks on the data. If I flip back to archives, now for example, if I wanted to delete a project, and I'll just delete this project because it's passed the check, and I'll delete this resource because it's passed the check. Now, when we do the delete, I mentioned that you've got this deleted resource, this default resource or default investment, and I'll just show you an example of that. How that works. I'll just flip back to resources, sorry, projects. Okay, so for example on projects, Andy Litton, is actually a project manager on this archive test project. Now, one of the things we could have done is said if you were deleting a resource, if it's a project manager, don't allow the resource to be deleted, but that's quite restrictive. So what we will do is we'll use that default resource and actually substitute the default resource in for anywhere where the resource we're deleting is referenced. Okay, where it's possible to do and not break clarity. So there are certain situations where we can't. So for example, the team, you're on the project team, we can't substitute in a default resource. Because if you were deleting 5 resources from that team, we can't put 5 default resources in very easily. So there are some places we can't, some places we can. So what I'll do is I'll just create an action for the delete project. So I'll submit an action. Because it's passed its check, I can run a delete action. And on this resource, I'll now submit. If I click on the right link, I'll submit a delete action for that resource as well. Okay, so now I have, if I look in my actions list, I have, excuse me, I'm looking at, if I look at scheduled, I now have 2 jobs that are scheduled, both are delete actions, one on resource delete archive and the second one on delete project archive. So again, if I flip back, I'll just run the job. Submit that. Okay. and that job will now be starting to process. Again, if I come back to the actions, I can see actually yep. Oh, let's just do an all. Yep, the resource is now running. The resource delete is now running, and the delete project is now scheduled. If I look in the job log for that job and just see what's going on, so we actually log everything. Now when I'm deleting a resource, what it has to do, and the delete resource takes a long time, well not a massive amount of time, but a period of time, one of the things it's got to do is it's got to check, if you think deleting a resource, it's got to check virtually every table. Okay, so if you think every table has a created by and a last updated by attribute, then one of the things we'll do is we'll go into those tables and substitute in wherever the resources we're deleting are found, the default resource. If we don't do that, then actually Clarity would break, because most of the joins, when it joins a table with a created by or last updated by to the SRM resources table, is not an outer join, it's just a straight join. So if we don't update those, then you know, we would have all of a sudden information would start disappearing from Clarity. So that will take a little while. I'm also waiting now for, so that will run, and actually the delete project will also run. So again, on the delete project will first run a number of set a default values, i.e. where it's been used, set a default value, and the next thing it will do is then start deleting the projects. The way it does the delete is different from the Clarity delete. The way Clarity deletes projects is it sort of does one project at a time, and it does it as a whole transaction. The way we do it is say, well, you've picked 50 projects to be deleted. We're going to go and delete all of the project tasks for all 50. Then we're going to delete all the, we'll delete all the assignments, and we already do we work out the logical order for them all. Okay. Again, when we do the delete, if I look in my archives directory, we will actually be maintaining an audit file for those for the deletes as well. So we can see at the bottom of the screen this one is growing. If I actually open that and have a look, I can actually see what it's actually doing at the time, and you can see I'm deleting. Oh, I finished the resources. So actually finish that. Yep. So the resource delete is finished. So if I actually have a look at the resource delete. This was a delete from SRM resources. You can see I actually had to issue a total of about 1,500 SQL queries. And you can see in here, this is the sort of thing it does. So it actually says I need to change information in all of these tables and set either a default value, a null value, or actually physically delete the data. And again, in here I can see the SQL that's being issued while it does the delete. What it also gives me information on is actually how long each query took. Okay, the parameters that are substituted in as well. Okay, so while we're waiting for the delete projects to finish, if I flip back to the screen, now the thing I mentioned when I did the resource delete, the resource I was deleting was actually assigned to as a project manager on a project. When I did the resource delete, if I go back to my project screen, it was Andy Litton here. And now because I've actually deleted the resource, it's now substituted in their deleted resource. So that's where we sort of correct or allow for deletions without being too restrictive. And there is a finite list of restrictions. I've mentioned things like for investments, you can't have a partial allocation in an investments hierarchy if you want to delete it. There are other things like, well, you can't have a running process. You can have completed processes or aborted processes, but if you've got a running process or a failed process, which is really a running process, we can't delete them because what we don't want to do is break the process engine. So by just deleting the data out of the table, we could actually break the engine running in memory. So there are certain situations where you can't, but the primary goal of the archiver was to enable easy deletion. And the thing to mention, I guess, as well, if people are familiar with the delete and clarity, when you archive a project, it takes the financials. So it takes all the WIP transactions with it. When you delete the project, it will delete all the WIP transactions. There is no separate job. A project is considered an object, and everything under it is also automatically included. What I also mean by automatically included, I also mean if you archive any primary object like resource project, any of the MPIOs, then if you've created a custom sub-object under that object, it will automatically get archived. If you create custom attributes, they will automatically get archived. And if those custom attributes are actually static lookups, it would go and get the static lookups automatically from the lookups table and archive those out. If it's a dynamic lookup and it's one of the out-of-the-box or add-in dynamic lookups, it will automatically go to the relevant table and grab the information when you read the data as well. So it's got quite a lot of built-in intelligence in terms of following links and relationships. If you have a custom attribute and it's actually a dynamic lookup, and that dynamic lookup is a custom dynamic lookup, i.e. one you've created yourself, not in this release, but in later releases, we will provide the ability to be able to configure our rules which enable you to automatically or be able to add your own dynamic lookups into the list, and it will then automatically handle those as well. In this release, if you wanted to handle dynamic lookups automatically and they're configured ones, then we probably just need to configure it for you. It's not a massive deal, but we just haven't provided any UI for that at the moment. Right, I've been talking as quickly as I could to get finished as quickly as I could and to give everybody an indication of what it does. I'm just now going to check and see if my project is still deleting. It does take a little while to delete the projects because it actually has to touch quite a lot of information. On this, I'm deleting one project, and you think, oh, well, that's taking a long time. But if it was one project versus 50 projects, the way it works, it doesn't really slow down much. So because it deletes everything related to a project from one table, then it still only visits all the tables once. It wouldn't say, well, I've now got to iterate through this 50 times. It does it, go to this table, delete everything for these projects from this table, and it deletes from the bottom up. So that and it keeps the transactions small, as I said, so that if it's locking the tables or causing problems with your redo logs, then it will actually keep the redo logs small and keep the locks only locked for a certain amount of time, so nothing will queue up behind it. So it should allow people to continue using the system at the same time.
So Andy, just being conscious of time, is it worth opening the call up to people if they've got any questions?
Definitely now, yeah.
So I don't know if there's anybody on the call that has any particular questions. You can either use the questions tab in the GoToWebinar, or you can unmute your line and ask us the question directly.
Yeah, I've seen a question from Yadagiri. What about how to view archive data? Well, there's two things there. One is, how do I see what I've archived? So there's actually an archive history view here. Now, the archive history view shows me actually what shows me a history of what I've done, really. So, for example, if I said, well, I'm interested in what have I done about resource, I think Litton, I can't remember what the name of it. Yeah, okay, that was the name of the resource I deleted. So I said, okay, I know that I had this resource, name was Litton, what's happened to it? So I can see, well, actually, Andy Litton resource was in archive set this, and it actually was deleted, and it was deleted on this date. So I actually have an archive history file. If I wish to actually physically view the archive data, then I've not shown you today, but there's a restore facility, and the restore facility allows you to restore the data into a relational database. It does not allow you to restore the data into Clarity. That relational database will have tables very similar to Clarity, and therefore you can actually write reports against that data. Or actually even use some of your existing queries and portlets queries to actually report that data in this archive database. And at the moment, we're not providing any views on that because it's actually where do you stop? You know, it can be anything. But the data will be restorable. The thing to mention is what we don't take is things like the data mart, and we don't take the slices tables. And the reason we don't take the slices tables is because part of the restore, when you restore the data into a database, we have a time slice library which provides you the ability to actually read the blobs in a SQL query and actually obtain all of the data in the blob, not just the time window that the slice tables actually present you. The slice tables are pretty useless really for archiving data. So yes, you can write reports against that external data source or access it via reports. Again, in Clarity, you're able to set up an alternate data source for your NSQL queries. So in CSA, you can go in, create a new database connection, point it at a restored database, and actually when you write an NSQL query, you can say, well, I'll point it at this database rather than the Clarity one, and then that data is visible in Clarity. But let's not forget that this data is not for, it's for archiving data out of Clarity and deleting it. It's not like a snapshot facility where I can just snapshot the data and report on it later on, and I'll do monthly reports on it. That's not the design. The design is enable us to archive data out, which we need for legal requirement, for legal reasons or for any corporate reasons, and then physically delete the data from Clarity so that we actually get the performance back in Clarity. I'm just looking at some more questions. I can't really see the questions window very well, but just in the data mart there's no link. Does this mean we could have data in the data mart that has no link in real tables? One of the requirements is, okay, so the data mart. So we don't archive data out of the data mart tables. So the requirement is once you've actually done a delete, you should rerun the data mart. The data mart does a complete refresh. The same is true for the portfolios. So actually once you've run the delete, if you're physically running delete actions, you should run the data mart and run the portfolio update jobs, and they will actually both resync it correctly and remove the data. The reason we don't touch the data mart tables is because it's got rolled up data in, and we'd end up actually having to rewrite the data mart code in order to do the roll up.
So Andy, just so that I can see all of the questions, so we have another question from Yadagiri, which is what about deletion from archive? So once we've archived the data, how do we delete it?
What, the data you've archived?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so the data you've archived is number one, is the data is archived to a database, to a file system. So the data is archived to the file system. That file system then, you can just physically, if you don't want that data anymore, just delete the files off the file system. So I can go into archives and I can just delete this directory and it's gone. If it's archived onto tape, there'll be a data retention policy and then the tapes will get blanked out. If I've decided to restore that data to a restore database, to actually use it because I'm getting audited and I need to look at the data, then when I'm finished with it, I can just delete the schema and it's gone. So we're trying to keep it fairly easy. What we don't want to have to do is have an archiver for the archive.
Yeah.
Within the Clarity itself is this archive history table, which we actually maintain. There's actually a job that maintains that. So in that job, you can say when anything the job will take a parameter that says anything in this history table that's over 2 years old, for example, go delete. Once I've done a deletion these archive sets I can just physically remove. So if I go to archives, once they're run, I can actually then just delete those manually. Not expecting there to be millions of these. Okay, any other questions?
Brilliant. Yeah, so we've got one from Mike Gillespie. What is your relationship with CA to validate your code? Are they okay with it? So shall I take this one or do you want to take it?
Well, I can say the original design was done in collaboration with CA, so we actually wrote it. We wrote the design. They actually paid us to write the design. So this is no surprise to them. We've been delayed slightly in regards to CA because they've had a change of personnel. We have a call tomorrow with Kurt to discuss the next stages in terms of getting this approved by CA. Because obviously what we need is to make sure it's approved by CA for the for support continuation. But we have a call with, we are dealing with CA on that at the moment.
Yep. So another question from Marty, can you archive notifications?
Notifications? No, not as distinct items, no. Do you want it to, if you want to be able to delete notifications, if you purely want to say our notifications, CLB notifications table has got 1 million records in it, that's a very simple job to write. Initially, our initial design was we were going to include that as part of the deliverable, and we may still do so. So we may include a delete notifications job still as part of this. But that's not, we never read them out and archive them, we'll just physically delete them. But it's sort of not really, yeah, sort of, that's clarity maintenance rather than archiving.
So a question from Colin, in terms of the separate storage device needed, where in Clarity is the configuration set to send archive items to?
Okay, so from a Clarity perspective, where do I send the data? When I run the job, I actually specify an output directory. So if I'm running on in a cluster, for example, I might want that to be on a shared SAN, similar way to the search indexes, or I can just put it on any directory that's accessible to the server.
Okay, question from Marty. Can you archive just participants from projects?
No.
Okay, easy one to answer.
Well, I think the thing to mention is when you say archive, what you need to be distinguishing is read or delete, or both, because archive means read and delete. And you know, although we say archive, when we say, yeah, I guess what you mean is saying archive read, but or do you actually mean delete? But yeah, we only archive at the top level, so we'll delete. You know, if you want to archive a project, that would read the data out. It would read the whole project out. And when you do a delete, it will delete all of the project information out. If you delete a resource, then it would delete the participants. And actually, it's clever because if you delete a resource and that resource is the collaboration manager, it will actually deal with that as well. So it won't leave you with no collaboration managers on a project.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've answered Chris's and one from Callum. Does archiving resources handle users as well?
Yes. So if you delete a resource from, if you want to use this for deleting resources, it will delete all the users, all the rights, any custom pages they've got defined for any objects, basically everything. It will clear the database of that resource. And as I mentioned, even things like the created by and last updated by attributes on every table, they will actually get sorted out and actually substituted with your default resource ID. You know, again, there are a series of things. There are a number of things where if it finds it, it can't delete. So another example is if that resource has got a timesheet, it won't be able to delete the resource. So if you want to delete resources, there's a logical order to deleting stuff. So the logical order is really you should delete timesheets first, second any master objects or projects that you want to get rid of, and then the last is resources.
Fantastic. Okay. So I think that's it for the questions. Obviously, guys, if you've got any more questions, feel free to either unmute your line and ask a question. If there was anything that we... okay, so Chris has one.
Yeah.
See if you can type quick enough, Chris.
I don't know if you want to open the call up.
So I won't force everybody to go on unmute. So okay, so while Chris is typing out his question, do you want to go back quickly to the demonstration, Andy, and just finish it off?
Yes, I was just going to say the delete project should have finished by now. Let's just check. So the job is now finished, and actually it took it about 9 minutes to actually do all of the jobs it had to do. Again, as I said, it's like one resource, one project, but in terms of the slowdown in terms of projects, then it doesn't slow down much. You know, you could have 50, 100 couple of hundred projects, it's about the same performance. And the reason for that is it's got to do so much checking on the delete. It's got to check this. It has to visit every table, because the last thing we want to do is leave anything broken. So, and as I said, there's like about 1,500 queries it has to run for just the resource delete. Also, because of the way it's written to be throttled, so what we don't want to do is overwhelm the system, so that if someone's running 24/7, they're not in a position that you're not going to get all of a sudden the archive is running and the deletions are happening and everything else stops dead. That's not what we want to happen. What you want is the delete just to run along in the background, trickling along, and everyone else to still be able to use the system. Yeah, so if I now look at my archives, the delete project has run. So if I look at delete project, what was I deleting? I can still see this. So PR1052, that was the project I was deleting. If I now go into projects, that project should now be gone. So delete this project is the name of it. If I look for that, that project will now be gone. And everything related to that project will be gone as well. Okay.
Fabulous. Okay, so the question from Chris, what if I only want to delete the timesheets for specific resources?
No, that's not in there. If that is a definite requirement, it's not a difficult thing to do, but it's not something we're doing out of the box day one, no.
Okay. Okay, so
the reason is, this is not, I mean, the reason is if you want to archive timesheets, the best thing to do is just archive them off. I mean, if your retention policy is, say for example, you know, to be quite honest, why do you need timesheets that are 5 years old or 4 years old? Really, you don't. I mean, the only reason you might want them is to look at the only thing that's not in a project once you posted a timesheet or in somewhere else is the indirects. So, I mean, to be quite honest, if you've got timesheets in there, say you want to delete a resource and the resource is date of termination was 7 years ago, then why would you have timesheets in there more than a few years old? Because you can just archive them off, restore them somewhere else if you wanted to, and delete them, and then they're gone from your live system.
Okay, brilliant. So I appreciate that we've run over slightly. So hopefully we've managed to answer all of your questions. Oh, yeah, Giri, okay. So in the future release of Clarity, timesheets may be available as an object. Will that be added to the list of objects to be archived?
Probably. I mean, one of the things we've had to do, for example, already is, I mean, well, it depends if you want to pick individual timesheets. We certainly could do that if we, in the future, I mean, we haven't seen it yet, so we don't know if it makes sense, but probably we could, yes. I mean, the thing to mention is, you know, what I did show you is, for example, under marked instances, we've already had to sort of objectize, if you like, the time period. So this is the archive time period is actually the timesheets time period, because actually when I'm selecting timesheets, I need, because of the way we do it, we've had to objectify that ourselves. So you know, even if Clarity didn't do it and someone really wanted it, we could probably objectify the timesheets just for us to use. Yeah, I mean, it depends. If the requirement is because you want to archive off timesheets for those resources, then the other and delete them. The other option is to, we could actually, what we've done, for example, if we look at project, if we look at the, and I'll just mention this. This is, we pretty much made this configurable, so it's not all exposed because at the moment we don't want to expose it. But for example, if I go to reports and jobs, one of the things we could do if there was a real requirement there was under defaults. Wrong place, sorry. Thinking wrong. Under the archive sets, for example, we say include documents, so that's to do with archiving. We could actually say, you know, put another section in there that says, well, actually, if I'm archiving a resource, I want to include timesheets for that resource. We just don't do it at the moment, but we can. It's just a simple click this, add this link in, and then it will go and get the timesheets as well. And then when it gets the timesheets, it gets the projects and everything related to those timesheets as well. So, I mean, it's possible to do. It depends what the need is. But that day one, no, it was not in there. Potentially day two. Depends on how many other people were interested in it.
Fantastic.
But it's possible to do, yeah.
Okay, so I'm guessing, unless there's any more questions from anybody, we could probably quite safely sum up. So hopefully we've given you enough information, or given you a quick overview of some of the functionality that's available in the archive for Clarity. As we've mentioned before, we are going to go into beta testing probably towards the end of next week. And I know some of you on the call have already signed up for beta testing, but if there are others on the call that haven't signed up and want to be part of the beta testing, then please drop me or Andy an email. Andy, if you can flash up that PowerPoint. If not, we can just share our emails at a later point in time. So I think that's it, guys. I mean, as I say, if you've got any questions that you want to ask us directly, feel free to send us an email. If you want to be part of the archiving beta testing, then again, feel free to send us an email. And if we haven't got any more questions, I'll close this the webinar. Brilliant. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all. Cheerio.